At 1:30 in the morning, Palm Beach is quiet. It's the kind of quiet you only really notice in places where everything feels controlled, maintained, expensive. Most nights at that hour, nothing moves except a few security vehicles, maybe a late car in the distance, and the ocean doing what it always does. But early Sunday morning, February 22nd, that quiet gets broken. And once you start walking through what we know happens step by step, it gets hard not to feel a little cold about it. Because the details aren't just unsettling on their own. They point straight at a bigger problem, a bigger pattern, and a bigger risk, right now, than a lot of people want to admit. So let me slow it down and take you through it the way law enforcement has been describing it. The person at the center of this is a 21-year-old man. His name is Austin Tucker Martin, originally from North Carolina, and somehow in the dark at 1:30 a.m., he makes it onto the grounds of Mar-a-Lago. Not just to the front gate, not to the edge of the property where someone might get spotted and chased off. He breaches the inner security perimeter. The inner perimeter. If you've ever paid attention to how executive protection works, how the Secret Service thinks about space, you already know why that phrase matters. The outer perimeter is supposed to be the early warning, the filter, the first line where you catch a problem before it becomes a crisis. The inner perimeter is different. That's the last wall, the final line before you're in the most sensitive area, the living quarters, the main facility, the places that simply can't be exposed. To get into the inner perimeter, you've already beaten something, or slipped through something, or found a seam in something. And that's the part that should bother everybody, regardless of politics. Because whatever you think about Donald Trump, or Mar-a-Lago, or the current state of this country, that inner perimeter is not supposed to be reachable by surprise. But Martin got there, and he wasn't empty-handed. He was carrying a shotgun, and he was carrying a gasoline can. And I want you to sit with that combination for a second, because it tells you a lot without needing any extra speculation. A shotgun at close range is pure devastation. It's not subtle. It's not measured. It's built for immediate, brutal impact. A gas can doesn't belong in a stealth scenario. A gas can is about fire, damage, chaos, something you want people to see. So when you put those together, shotgun and gasoline, you're not looking at someone trying to sneak in, grab something, and disappear. You're looking at someone who came prepared to create a loud, violent, very visible event. And usually when someone shows up with that kind of setup, it doesn't look like a person planning to calmly surrender and go home afterward. So it's 1:30 a.m. Dark hours. That moment in the night when most normal people are asleep, and even the ones awake aren't at their sharpest. But the security detail is awake. Secret Service is there. Local law enforcement is there too, Palm Beach County deputies, the ones who supplement the federal footprint around Mar-a-Lago. And they spot him near the north gate, inside the inner ring. That's where the timeline tightens. Sheriff Rick Bradshaw from Palm Beach County gives a press conference, and the way he describes what happens is clinical, direct, no drama, just the cold mechanics of a lethal encounter. Officers confront Martin. They give the standard commands, the kind of commands that don't need interpretation. Drop the weapons. Now, in a lot of cases, more than people realize, those moments end without shots. Someone panics, freezes, drops what they have. Hands go up. That's it. But that's not what happened here. Bradshaw says Martin dropped the gas can. So, in that first second, he does comply at least partially. The fuel container hits the ground. And then, he raises the shotgun. He brings it up to a shooting position. And at that point, there's no extended conversation. There's no time for bargaining. No let's see how this goes. If you raise a firearm toward law enforcement, especially inside the inner perimeter of a former president's residence, the response is instant. Secret Service and the deputies open fire. They neutralize the threat. Austin Tucker Martin is pronounced dead at the scene. And that's the end of the action, but it's the beginning of the real complexity. Because once the shots stop, the questions start stacking up. The first question a lot of people immediately asked was simple. Where was Donald Trump? And we know now this is important. Trump was not at Mar-a-Lago at the time. He wasn't on the premises. That matters because it shifts the immediate target question a little bit. But it does not reduce the severity of what happened. A man with a shotgun got into the inner perimeter of Mar-a-Lago. That is still a security breach of the highest sensitivity, even if the principal protectee wasn't physically present. So then you start asking the next set of questions. Did Martin know Trump wasn't there? Was he targeting the property itself? Was he targeting the symbolism, the idea of Mar-a-Lago as a political center of gravity? Or was he operating on bad information, believing Trump was inside asleep? Right now, we don't have those answers publicly. That's exactly what the FBI is trying to determine. And this is where you see the jurisdictional shift happen almost immediately. Local officers handle the immediate response. Secure the scene. Medical calls. Tape. perimeter. But then the federal system moves in. Brett Skiles, the FBI special agent in charge, steps up after Sheriff Bradshaw and confirms the FBI's evidence response team is controlling the scene. And if people hear evidence response team and think it's just someone taking pictures and collecting shell casings, no. That team rebuilds the event. They map it, measure it, freeze it in time. They'll map every inch of that area near the north gate. They'll trace the exact path Martin took from the street to the inner perimeter. They'll examine the gas can for fingerprints, residue, origin, where it came from, when it was purchased if they can identify that, any link to a store, any surveillance footage from wherever it might have been bought. They'll take the shotgun and trace it through serial number records. Who bought it? Was it legally purchased in North Carolina? How did it travel across state lines? Was it modified? And honestly, in 2026, this is where most of the investigation really leaves his digital footprint. Because right now, federal agents are almost certainly going through his phone, his computer, his social media history, messages, searches, location data if they can access it. They are interviewing family, friends, co-workers, anybody who might have had a window into his mental state. They are looking for the why, because a 21-year-old from North Carolina doesn't just magically appear inside the inner perimeter of Mar-a-Lago at 1:30 in the morning by accident. There's a trail. There's always a trail. Maybe it's a trail of radicalization. Maybe it's a trail of mental decline. Maybe it's a trail of obsession and intent building over time. But it's a trail. And this event, this fatal shooting, isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a very specific moment in American life. And we have to be honest about the larger context. This is now the third major security incident at a Trump property in recent years. 3 times. That's not a minor detail. Think about what that does to the entire protective posture around these places. Think about what that does to the Secret Service agents assigned to this detail. Mar-a-Lago isn't the White House. The White House is literally designed to be a fortress, layers on layers on layers. Hardened perimeter, controlled access, deep buffer zones, a permanent security architecture built into the space. Mar-a-Lago is a private club. It's on a barrier island. Water on one side, roads on the other. It's a property built for hospitality, for members, for staff, for deliveries, for constant movement. And yet the Secret Service has to treat it with a zero-failure mindset. That's the job. And when you try to retrofit a hospitality environment into something that has to operate like a high-threat security compound, you're going to have seams. You're going to have gaps. And people who are motivated, who are fixated, who are unstable, they hunt for seams. So one of the most glaring operational questions in this entire incident is the obvious one. How did he get past the outer perimeter? Because again, the outer perimeter is supposed to stop this before it ever becomes a gun raised in the inner ring situation. Was he in a vehicle? Did he ram something? Did he park nearby and approach on foot? Did he use the shoreline? Did he climb something in the dark? Was he just unbelievably lucky? We don't have the precise public detail yet on the method of entry. But the fact that he reached the inner perimeter means something failed or something got missed in those earlier layers. And that's the part that is going to draw intense scrutiny. Not just internally, not just in Palm Beach, in Washington. Because when a man with a shotgun gets that far, it becomes a question Congress will ask. Committees will ask. Oversight will ask. You can pretty much guarantee it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The agents and deputies in the final seconds did their jobs exactly the way they're trained to do them. They confronted him. They issued commands. They assessed the threat. When the shotgun was raised, they responded immediately. They neutralized the threat. No casualties to law enforcement. No extended firefight. No collateral chaos in the compound. That's textbook in the most brutal way. But the system as a whole, the layers that are supposed to prevent that lethal encounter from even being necessary, something in those layers didn't do what it was supposed to do. And we're in a time where political violence isn't theoretical anymore. It's practical. It's happening. And that's why this event feels heavier than just another breach. Because it fits into a broader normalization. The idea that people are now willing to bring weapons to political targets, people, properties, symbolic locations, and force these confrontations into existence. And you can see the media trying to keep up with it in real time. The Associated Press moves fast with the basic facts. North Carolina man, 21, dead at the scene. CBS News brings video of Sheriff Bradshaw giving his statement. And if you watch Bradshaw's demeanor, he's not performing. He's not trying to inflame anything. He's delivering facts with the tone of someone who understands exactly what just happened on his watch. There's a specific way law enforcement speaks when an incident is this sensitive. Stripped of emotion. Procedural. Drop the item. He dropped the item. He raised the weapon. We fired. But under that plain language is the real reality, how fast it all happens. Imagine being that agent or deputy in the dark. It's 1:30. Shadows everywhere. And suddenly you're looking at a person with a long gun and an accelerant. You call out. You issue commands. And there's this split second where a part of you still hopes it ends peacefully. Because nobody wants to pull the trigger. Nobody. And then the barrel comes up. In that fraction of time, you're not thinking about motive. You're not thinking about politics. You're not thinking, is it loaded, because if you guess wrong, you don't get a second chance. You're thinking training. And training says, weapon raised, threat immediate, act now. So they act. And then, after that, the sun comes up. Evidence markers go down. The body is removed. Tape goes up. And the political world wakes up to another headline. Someone tried to bring violence to the doorstep of a former president. And now comes the next inevitable layer. What does this do to the political temperature? Because we know how this plays out. When facts are limited, speculation expands to fill the space. People start asking if he was working for someone, even if he was alone. People start digging through whatever they can find online, and then projecting their own assumptions onto it. If he posted anti-Trump rhetoric, one side will try to use it. If he posted conspiratorial, chaotic, nonpartisan stuff, another side will try to use that. And the truth is, none of that helps you understand the operational reality of what happened. The FBI Brett Skiles, he's not chasing spin. He's chasing timeline. He's looking at the 48 hours before the shooting. Where did Martin sleep Friday night? Did he drive straight down from North Carolina? Did he stop along the way? Did he talk to anyone at a gas station? Did he leave anything behind? Did he send texts, make calls? Because just the logistics of doing this tell you something. North Carolina to South Florida is a long drive. It gives a person time. Time to cool off. Time to reconsider. Time to turn around. He didn't. Whether he drove straight through or staged locally, and waited, we know he chose 1:30 a.m. That's not random. That's tactical. It suggests he wanted darkness. Fewer people. Less activity. Less attention on the approach. And yet again, the gas can suggests he wanted something visible. Fire. A blaze. Something that would be seen. Fire doesn't just destroy property. It creates panic. It draws resources. It draws cameras. It turns a place into a spectacle. If you set a fire at Mar-a-Lago, the entire world watches. So you've got this contradiction. Stealth timing paired with equipment that screams spectacle. That combination points to a troubled mind. A mind chasing some kind of grand finale. And we've seen that profile before in different forms. Young, isolated, locked into a private internal narrative, feeling like they have to force the world to look at them, or force history to bend around them. And the fact that he chose Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's residence, tells you something about how political figures and political symbols occupy the mental space of unstable individuals right now. They become avatars. Not just people. Not just buildings. Avatars. And the Secret Service is caught in the middle of that. They're the ones standing watch in the dark, waiting for the moment when one of these internal fantasies becomes a real-world approach to a gate. Now, one detail from Bradshaw's remarks that matters, and it's worth emphasizing, is the coordination aspect. Bradshaw said his deputies and the Secret Service were together. They confronted Martin together. They fired together. That's the layered approach in action. The Secret Service doesn't do this alone. They rely heavily on local agencies to expand coverage, increase presence, fill in the geographic and staffing gaps. Palm Beach County deputies know that terrain better than anyone. They know what normal looks like at 1:38. They know the patterns, the traffic, the water, the routes people take, the places someone might try to slip in. So when a 21-year-old shows up walking around with a shotgun and a gas can, that's not even suspicious. That's an emergency by definition. And in that moment, when both agencies react simultaneously, when they neutralize the threat without friendly fire or collateral damage, that's joint training working. But it still doesn't answer the bigger failure question. Because joint training is about what happens when the breach reaches you. It's not supposed to be the main plan. The main plan is that the breach never reaches the inner ring. So now you can almost predict what the next few days look like behind the scenes. The FBI evidence response team is processing the scene in Palm Beach methodically, obsessively. They're pulling camera footage. They're syncing it with radio traffic. They're reconstructing the timeline down to seconds. How long was Martin inside the perimeter before being confronted? Was it 5 seconds? Was it 5 minutes? Did an alarm trigger? Did someone spot him visually? How many cameras were watching the North Gate? Were they monitored live? If an alarm tripped, how long until contact? All of that will be answered in the internal reconstruction. And parts of that report will likely become public later, at least in summary form, because this is too big to just disappear into a file cabinet. But right now, for the public, the picture is mostly outline. AP alert. brief press conference, footage of yellow tape and law enforcement vehicles. And that's why it's worth stopping and thinking about what almost happened. Because if Donald Trump had been there, if he'd been asleep on the property, the psychological impact would be far heavier. Not necessarily because the outcome would have been different in those final seconds. The response likely would have been just as immediate. But because the symbolism of a breach reaching the inner perimeter, while the former president is present, that shakes the public sense of order in a different way. Even with him absent, the vulnerability is exposed. You can't secure a club perfectly. You can mitigate. You can reduce risk. You can stack layers. But you're always dealing with a property that has to function as a place where people come and go. And when the risk shows up in the form of a young man with nothing to lose, a shotgun, and a container of fuel mitigation sometimes looks like exactly what we saw at 1:30 a.m. A sudden, violent stop. There's no clean way to handle a man who raises a gun at federal agents. It's ugly. It's loud. It leaves a mark on the scene, on the people involved, and on the larger political landscape. And we're not even at the next major phase yet, which is the narrative war. Because in the current environment, an event like this doesn't stay in the category of isolated security incident for very long. It turns into argument material. It turns into a wedge. It'll be used to justify more security resources, more money, more personnel, more hardware, more restrictions. It'll be used to argue about rhetoric and incitement and political temperature. It'll be used to point fingers in every direction. But if you strip all of that away, the core story right now is brutally simple. A young man traveled down from North Carolina. He brought a shotgun. He brought gasoline. He got past the outer defenses of Mar-a-Lago. He was confronted inside the inner perimeter. He dropped the gas can. He raised the shotgun. And he was shot and killed. That is the cold reality of February 22nd. Everything else, the political noise, the commentary loops, the online speculation, that's the fallout. But the core is a fatal decision made in the quiet of Palm Beach. Now, one thing I keep coming back to is that phrase Bradshaw used. Raise the shotgun to a shooting position. That's not the same as he was holding it. That's not it was in his hands. That's a deliberate action. A shotgun is heavy. Awkward. It's not something you casually flick upward. If you're startled, you might drop it. You might freeze. You might run. To raise it into a shooting position means you are acquiring a target. It means you made a decision. And at 21 years old, facing armed agents and deputies, he chose to do that anyway. No surrender. No hesitation in that moment. And the agent's response is muscle memory. People sometimes misunderstand that and think it sounds cold. But it's not cold. It's necessity. Action is faster than reaction. If an agent waits to confirm intent, waits to see the trigger pull, they may be dead before the confirmation arrives. So the threshold is clear. Weapon raised and pointed. Threat is immediate. And the response is immediate. Now, while all of this is happening in Palm Beach, there's another operation that likely spins up almost instantly in North Carolina. Because the FBI doesn't just process the scene and stop there. They are going to wherever Martin lived. They are executing search warrants. They are talking to family. And I want you to imagine that from the family side, because it's one of the grim human realities in cases like this. It's Sunday morning, and federal agents show up at your door. And you're told your 21-year-old son is dead shot at Mar-a-Lago after breaching security with a shotgun and a gas can. That's a level of shock most people never experience. And then you're immediately in the middle of a federal investigation. Questions, interviews, searches, the house being processed, electronics being seized. And usually, in cases like this, the family is the last to understand how far the person drifted. A lot of these individuals retreat inward. They live in their own head and on their screens. And if their mental state is deteriorating, or if they're getting pulled into a radicalizing spiral, it often happens privately. The outside world sees bits and pieces. Mood changes, isolation, odd statements, maybe nothing obvious at all. But internally, the person is building a framework where driving to Florida with a shotgun and gasoline feels logical to them. The FBI will reconstruct that framework. Was it purely political? Was it a deeper psychological break? Was it some blend of grievance, vexation, and personal collapse? We don't know the answer publicly yet, but we do know the age 21. And that matters. It's a volatile age in general, especially for young men who are unmoored. Impulse control still developing. Identity still forming. And in the digital age, the speed of radicalization or just the speed of obsession can be terrifying. 10 years ago, a threat took time. A person had to write letters, talk to someone, show patterns people might catch. Now someone can sit alone, consume hours of content, lock themselves into a narrative, tell nobody, pack a car, and drive to a target. There are no tripwires in the mind. So the only tripwires left are physical. Outer gate. Inner gate. And that's why the outer perimeter failure, the fact that Martin got inside the wire at all, is the most critical operational takeaway from this whole nightmare. If digital tripwires fail, and they often do, physical security has to carry the load. And in this case, physical security didn't fully stop him until the inner, which leads directly to the conversations that are probably happening right now at higher levels. Do they need more sensors, more cameras, more barriers? Do they need to rethink the geography around Mar-a-Lago at night? Do adjacent roads need to be restricted? Do waterways need more monitoring? Because again, this is the harsh part. The fear is never only about the guy they stop. The fear is about the person watching the news right now, seeing that someone got past outer layers, and thinking, I can do it better. Copycat effect is real. When one person breaches a perimeter, it sends a message to other unstable people who are already entertaining similar fantasies. It tells them it's possible to get close. It tells them the fortress has a door. That's why the FBI investigation is so critical. They don't just want motive. They want method. They want the how so they can close that exact gap. They'll look at his search history if they can access it. Did he look up Mar-a-Lago's layout? Did he research security shifts? Did he study access points? And here's another uncomfortable reality of modern executive protection. Open source intelligence is everywhere. Tourists film everything. People post videos of checkpoints. Vlogs show the environment from angles you wouldn't normally think matter. Someone with enough time and obsession can piece together a pretty accurate picture of a security posture without ever stepping foot on the property. If Martin was paying attention, he could have built a plan from his bedroom in North Carolina. And when you combine that kind of information access with a shotgun, a gas can, and a willingness to die, you get a nightmare scenario. We are incredibly fortunate Trump was not on the property. That's not politics. That's math. Because even if the agents still stopped him, the stakes would have been astronomical if the former president were present. And even with Trump absent, the danger doesn't go away. If Martin had succeeded in igniting the gasoline, if a fire had started on that property in the middle of the night, the risks to staff, security, and the structure itself would have been immense. A large fire at a sprawling, historic estate is hard to contain even in daylight. At 1:30 a.m., it's worse. So in a sense, the agents didn't just stop an armed intrusion. They likely prevented a major arson event. And then there's another part of this story people rarely talk about. The toll on the agents and deputies who fired. They did what they were supposed to do. They were in the clearest possible duty and self-defense scenario. A firearm raised toward them. But taking a life, no matter how justified, lands on people. There will be administrative leave. There will be interviews. Weapons will be taken for ballistics testing. Reports will be written. The shooting will be reviewed. And then those agents still have to go back out and stand watch again. Because the threat doesn't stop. And as you watch the coverage reporters outside the tape, law enforcement statements, the quick hit alerts, it's hard not to notice how familiar this rhythm has become. We're getting used to breaking news banners about attempted violence at political targets. We're getting used to calm press conferences explaining that an armed person tried to attack a political figure or a political location. We're slowly losing the ability to be shocked by it. When that, honestly, might be the most dangerous part. Because when something like a 21-year-old with a shotgun breached the inner perimeter of Mar-a-Lago becomes just another cycle, just another argument, we've drifted into a very unstable normal. This should be a profound shock to the system. It should tell us the temperature is too high, that the environment is too volatile, that people on the fringe feel emboldened, or desperate, or both, to take physical action. But instead, it'll get processed through the partisan machine like everything else. So if you want to keep your footing, you go back to the raw facts. The FBI evidence response team is doing that. They're looking at the shotgun and the gas can and the perimeter. They're tracing the fuel, tracing the gun, figuring out whether the shotgun purchase was recent or older. If it was recent, that suggests a tight premeditation window. If he'd owned it for years, that suggests repurposing an existing weapon for this act. Every detail adds a brushstroke to the portrait of who he was in the days and weeks leading up to this. Not to sympathize, not to romanticize, to understand the threat vector. Because if we don't understand how a 21-year-old from North Carolina ends up driving to Florida and trying to breach Mar-a-Lago with a shotgun and gasoline, we won't be able to stop the next one. And history tells you there will be a next one. Threats evolve, but they don't vanish. And protective work has a brutal asymmetry built into it. The Secret Service has to be right every single time. The attacker only has to get lucky once. On Sunday morning, Martin got lucky enough to bypass the outer layer. Lucky enough to get inside the wire. But his luck ended at the inner perimeter. Because that's where the margin for error drops to zero. That's where trained people make the final calculation. Drop the weapons. He drops the gas can. He raises the shotgun. And the calculation completes itself. Now, there's a local law enforcement angle here that matters more than people outside Florida might realize. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office isn't a typical local agency in terms of daily reality. Because of Mar-a-Lago, because of the constant presence of high-profile political figures, they operate at a level of tactical integration you normally associate with major national security environments. Sheriff Bradshaw has been living in that dynamic for years. His deputies are deeply integrated with Secret Service operations around that property. So when you hear a deputy and 2 Secret Service agents confronted the suspect, that tells you something about how the patrol structure is set up. Joint patrols, overlapping responsibilities, shared zones, and that's what you want in a place like that. Local deputies bring terrain knowledge, local pattern awareness. Federal agents bring the protective mission focus and specialized protocols. In a high-stress confrontation, communication has to be flawless. And in this case, it appears both agencies recognized the lethal threat at the same moment and reacted at the same moment. That's not automatic. That's training and coordination. But then, immediately after, the local side gets pulled into a larger federal machine. They are interviewed, separated, their weapons taken for testing, every action documented, and it all happens under the glare of international attention. So Bradshaw's press conference brief, factual, no extra commentary, also makes sense in that context. He says what the public needs to know. An armed suspect breached security, raised a weapon, law enforcement fired, the suspect is dead, and then he hands it over to the FBI. And when Brett Skiles steps up, that's the visual cue that the federal government is now fully in control of the scene. And the evidence response teamwork is relentless. They can shut down a section for days. Laser scanning, trajectory analysis, accounting for every round fired, confirming where bullets went, making sure there was no collateral damage, making sure nothing left the property and endangered anyone else. Because when a shooting happens at a location that's sensitive, everything has to be accounted for. Every casing, every impact, every sightline, every camera angle. And while all of that is being done in Palm Beach, the parallel investigation in North Carolina is almost certainly running at the same time. Talking to family, talking to people who knew him, trying to find the warning signs that were missed. Because there are always warning signs. Maybe not obvious ones. Maybe not the kind that scream this is coming. But signs, a shift, a fixation, a withdrawal, a pattern online, a statement to someone that didn't fully register until afterward. And if those warning signs existed here, and chances are, some form of them did, the question becomes, who saw them, and why didn't anything interrupt this before it reached the inner perimeter? That's the bigger question hanging over all of it. And then beyond that, you've got the Department of Homeland Security and Secret Service leadership having to look at the perimeter failure. Because they're going to have to explain how a breach reached the inner ring. They're going to have to explain what changes are being made so it doesn't happen again. And yes, everyone knows there's no perfect guarantee. Not in a world like this. Security is, in a sense, an agreement we all live under, a belief that the layers will hold. Until someone with a shotgun and a gas contests the layers. Then the illusion cracks. So where do we land right now? Before more information comes out, we land on the facts. 1:30 a.m. Palm Beach. A 21-year-old man, Austin Tucker Martin, from North Carolina. He breaches the inner security perimeter at Mar-a-Lago. He's carrying a shotgun and a gasoline can. He's confronted by Secret Service and Palm Beach County deputies. They order him to drop the weapons. He drops the gas can. He raises the shotgun into a shooting position. They open fire. He is pronounced dead at the scene. Trump is not at Mar-a-Lago at the time. The FBI evidence response team takes control of the scene. Brett Skiles confirms the federal investigation is active. And now the system is in that familiar mode. Reconstruct, trace, interview, map, analyze, physical evidence, digital footprint, timeline, motives, method, and over the next stretch of days, the public will get more pieces. Maybe not all of them. Not immediately. But enough for the larger debate to ignite. And that debate is coming, whether anyone wants it or not. But if you want to keep this grounded, if you want to understand what actually happened, you don't start with the debate. You start with the reality of the perimeter. You start with how someone got that far. You start with what the equipment suggests about intent. You start with the moment of confrontation and the split-second decision that ended it. And you keep watching what the FBI pulls from his digital life, because that's where the why usually shows itself. In fragments, searches, messages, posts, patterns, the obsession trail. Because the truth is, no one pulls off a breach like this without leaving something behind. The question is whether it gets recognized in time in the future, before the next person makes it to an inner gate. So yes, we're going to keep tracking what comes out of the investigation. We're going to watch for what DHS says about how the outer perimeter was bypassed. We're going to pay attention to what the evidence recovery reveals, because it's going to tell us not just about one person, but about the vulnerability of the environment itself. And if you zoom out, that's really what this is. Not just a story about one 21-year-old making a fatal choice in the dark. It's a story about how close chaos can get now to the center of American political power when someone is motivated and unstable and armed. Sunday morning, it got all the way to the inner perimeter, and the only thing that stopped it was training and reflexes agents and deputies standing in the dark, doing the job the hard way. That's where we stand, and that's what we have to process, whether we like it or not.